Hello, and welcome to the Language of Leadership, where we're going to dive into the skills, principles, and practices that define great leaders. I'm your host, Chuck Marting, and today we're going to tackle a topic that I think every leader, no matter what industry, has faced, and that's difficult employees. I just came back from a few conferences where I both assisted in the training and then I also spoke. And the one thing that I heard from a lot of different leaders was dealing with disgruntled employees or employees that were causing problems or issues. And it's something that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you face it. And that's having to deal with these difficult employees. Now, we're not talking about employees who occasionally miss a deadline or they struggle with a project. Today, we're talking about those who are chronically complaining about leadership. They blame other team members and they refuse to take responsibility for their actions. So, in this episode, I'll be sharing some insights from some leadership icons like John Maxwell, Jack Canfield, Victor Hansen, and Brant Hansen. And you're going to learn how to discipline effectively and encourage accountability and even transform challenging dynamics into opportunities for growth. So let's dive in. I want to start with the concept that leadership is influence. It's a lesson emphasized by John Maxwell through his career. Difficult employees can be a direct reflection of the workplace culture, and oftentimes this behavior points to unspoken issues that leaders may unintentionally be encouraging. You see, John Maxwell's philosophy teaches us that we set the tone for our teams, whether we realize it or not. He shared a story from his early years as a leader. He was once managing a talented team where one member consistently underperformed. That individual shifted blame to others and he resisted accountability. So rather than jumping straight to reprimanding him, John Maxwell sat down with his team member and asked a few pointed questions about his role. He asked him about his goals and the impact he wanted to have on the team that he was working with. And throughout that conversation, John Maxwell discovered the employee felt undervalued and that he felt unheard. And by addressing his concerns directly and setting clear expectations, John Maxwell was able to build trust and gradually shifted this person's behavior. What's key here is that John Maxwell didn't discipline him. Instead, he used influence to guide him towards accountability. So, what's the takeaway? Well, before addressing an employee's behavior, maybe we need to reflect on how you may be influencing the team. Are you modeling the standards you want to see? Are you engaging directly and setting a tone of transparency? One of the most toxic behaviors in any team is the constant cycle of complaining. Victor Hansen, he's the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. He's often spoke about the damage that negativity can have and it can bring to the work environment. He believes that complaints don't just drain morale, they distract the team from what's possible. So, Victor Hansen recalls working with a client who seemed to complain about every obstacle. He used a method I've found effective, and that's every time that the client raised a problem, he would gently ask, "What's one thing we can do to improve this?" This simple question redirected the focus from complaining to problem solving. As leaders, it's crucial to recognize when complaints are justified and then when they're just a habit. When an employee is complaining about another team member, trying to use this approach is going to help. Rather than entertaining the complaint, ask for one positive solution they'd suggest to resolve the issue. This kind of redirection can break the cycle of blame. By encouraging solutions and have oriented thinking, you create a culture where complaints are addressed constructively, and team members will feel empowered to make positive changes. So, if someone refuses to adapt, it's a signal that discipline may be necessary to maintain a productive team environment. One of my most favorite leadership insights comes from Jack Canfield and his philosophy of taking 100% responsibility. In his book, The Success Principles, Jack emphasizes that individuals must own their actions, their thoughts, and their outcomes. This principle of full responsibility is powerful when dealing with difficult employees. And we've spoken about this principle often here on the Language of Leadership. Jack shares a story from his own experience running a business where his employee consistently missed deadlines and blamed other departments for their lack of progress. Rather than accepting these excuses, Jack held a meeting and asked the employee to outline every factor within their control that could help them meet deadlines. By focusing the conversation on personal accountability, he helped this employee see their part in the problem. For leaders, this approach can be transformative. Instead of confronting the employee with a laundry list of issues, frame the conversation around their responsibility. So try this. Ask the employee to list out every part of their role they control. Then, collaboratively set goals for improvement based on these factors. If they're unwilling to acknowledge their role, it's clear that further action is necessary. This tactic isn't just discipline. It empowers employees to recognize their capacity to change and improve. And sometimes that's all it takes for an employee to shift their mindset and start making better decisions and choices. Now, let's talk about an issue many leaders encounter, and that's the blame game. Brant Hansen, a writer and speaker known for his emphasis on grace and accountability, he has a unique perspective on addressing this behavior. You see, he believes that while it's essential to hold people accountable, it's equally important to show empathy. Now, he said that he once worked with a colleague who had the habit of blaming others for every mistake. And rather than reprimanding him publicly or even privately, he took the person aside and began by expressing appreciation for the colleague's contributions. He then gently pointed out specific examples of how blaming was impacting the team and their trust. He explained that this approach was about building a bridge. By combining empathy with accountability, he made it clear that while mistakes happen, how we respond matters just as much. So after the conversation, he said that he saw a noticeable shift in his colleagues' behavior. For leaders, this approach could be incredibly effective. So start by expressing empathy, acknowledging their strengths, and then calmly discuss the impact of their blaming behavior. This balanced approach can often be the catalyst for change. So encouraging employees to take ownership of their actions without feeling attacked or even devalued is crucial. So when it comes to disciplining employees, this can be very tough, especially if you want to do it constructively. So one approach is what they call the feedback sandwich, which you start with a positive feedback, you address the issue, and then you engage and end with encouragement. This technique helps soften the criticism while making sure the message is clear. So let's say you have an employee who's repeatedly coming in late. Instead of saying, "You're always late and it's unacceptable," you might start with, "I really appreciate the energy you bring to the team when you're here." And then you move on to, "However, I've noticed you're often late and it's starting to impact the team performance." And then you end with something like, "I know you have the potential to turn this around, and I'm here to support you." Another method I like is a goal-based discipline. So set a measurable goal that the employee needs to meet as part of their improvement. For instance, over the next month, let's work together to ensure you're arriving at least 90% of the time on time. When discipline is structured around clear expectations and has a positive reinforcement, it's much easier for an employee to see it as a path of growth rather than a punishment. So when it comes to reinforcing positive behavior, John Maxwell said, and he is a strong advocate of celebrating small wins. He explains that when people feel appreciated, they're naturally more motivated to improve and be accountable. I remember reading how John Maxwell would often recognize even the smallest improvements in his team, such as a change in attitude or even improvement in their punctuality. That created a culture where team members felt and seemed to feel more valued. One practical way to apply this is by implementing a reward system. It doesn't have to be extravagant. Small rewards like public recognition with the team or additional responsibilities can be powerful. So the key is consistency, though. So recognize the behaviors you want to see more of, and you'll gradually see these positive traits spread throughout your team. Now, building a culture of responsibility takes time, but it's one of the most valuable investments you can make as a leader. Now, both Jack Canfield and Victor Hansen emphasize the importance of consistent feedback and accountability to create a culture where responsibility is valued. They give an example of advocates for a regular team meeting are focused on self-improvement. So they give an example that in their own teams, they would encourage members to share personal growth goals, celebrate each other's progress, and this approach fostered a sense of collective responsibility where the team members held each other accountable, but in a positive way. So, how do you build this type of a culture? Well, there are 3 steps to this. First, you hold regular growth-focused meetings. This is where everyone discusses personal and team goals. Second, you encourage open communication by creating a safe space for feedback where employees can voice their concerns constructively. And then third, you lead with transparency. So you're going to share your own accountable goals and your growth areas. By taking these steps, you create a workplace where accountability is just not a rule, but it's a shared value within the team. Now, let's look at a couple quick case studies to illustrate these principles in action. So let's look at case number 1. Imagine an employee who constantly shifts blame. A leader applying John Maxwell or even Jack Canfield's methods might hold a one-on-one conversation focused on what the employee can control. This helps the employee recognize their part in the problem and it starts to change the behavior. Now, let's look at a second case. This is where a team member is resistant to your feedback. You, as a leader, using Brant Hansen's approach, might start with empathy, acknowledging the employee's strengths, and before gently addressing the feedback, resistant behavior. This balanced approach helps to reduce defensiveness and encourages growth. So, for those listening, try a role play exercise where you practice giving constructive feedback. This is a way that reflects empathy and accountability. It's a great way to strengthen your discipline skills, and it helps before you need to apply them in a real situation. Dealing with difficult employees, it just isn't easy, but as leaders, it's our responsibility to set the example. We have to address these issues early, and we have to create a culture of accountability. John Maxwell's insights on influence and Brant Hansen's approach to grace-filled accountability that we've covered is a range of strategies that they can apply to every team. So remember, discipline isn't about just punishment. It's about growth. It's about helping your employee reach their full potential, even if they're challenging. So here's my call to action. Pick one of these techniques that we discussed today and apply it this week. Observe how it impacts your team dynamics and let me know how it goes. I have to face the same challenges that we talk about here on the language of leadership. I just recently had to go through this with an employee, and I went through some of the steps that I've shared with you today. And I realized that not everybody is going to respond in the way that we would like them to, or even see the potential in themselves that we see in them. We have to try and be the best leader we can be, though, and we have to be able to show that empathy. Make sure that you document your journey with this individuals on your teams. Make sure you document what you've tried and what you've done. So that way, when an individual comes back and says that you're not on their side or that you're not giving them the respect that they need, You have the documentation to show every step of the way that you've tried to help this individual before you have to take the next step in this disciplinary journey with them. This will help you because I think a lot of times we as leaders, sometimes we second guess ourselves. Maybe there was something else we could have done. Maybe there was something, if I would have given them just a little bit more time, if I would have acknowledged them just a little bit more. This documentation is going to help you reflect, look back, and see that you honestly tried to do what was best for that employee in addressing the disruption that they have been for your team and for your leadership. I hope that this episode has helped. I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Language of Leadership. I hope that you feel that this is a show that you can share with other leaders and help them with their growth journey as well. I want you to be able to share it and be able to know that we're here to help you on your leadership journey. So until next week, when we bring you another episode of The Language of Leadership, remember, keep leading with integrity, keep leading with empathy, and also remember accountability. Until next week, take care.